Hello, welcome. So today I am chatting with a friend, a soul sister, someone who I absolutely love, appreciate, admire, respect. Her name is Michelle. We both go pretty deep, and we'll be doing that today. We're going to be talking about a couple of things, talking about the necessary waiting/gestation period when we want to bring something to life or be born again, born anew, whether it's ourselves or a creation. And then we're going to be talking about emotional depth and how things look differently at the surface as opposed to when we explore those deeper depths and what can come out and up as a result of exploring those deeper layers. So like I said, this will be a fun deep talk because Michelle and I tend to go deep. So that's our thing. I'll share a little bit. I know I said I introduced her already as my friend, my soul sister. We go really deep, which I love. I love our connection and our conversations. And I want to get this right. So I am sharing from a written form of what she does and her expertise. So she's a holistic lifestyle mentor, offering strategies for health, healing, well-being, and personal transformation. New beginnings are her specialty, creating space for awakenings, transformation, personal momentum, and quantum/cellular activation. Yay, Michelle's here. The one and only, the one I'm introducing. So she's here. So this is going to be some good, soulful chat. Always juicy. Always juicy. I do believe Michelle is a Scorpio. I don't know if I have any Scorpio in my chart, although I do have Cancer and Capricorn. Scorpio has to be in there somewhere. I don't know where, but I do believe it's in there somewhere. I also wanted to talk about, Michelle does Michi's Munchies. That was something else. I know I already shared what she tends to do in terms of some of her passion, some of her soul work, what she does online, what she shares in terms of services. But she does have an amazing Michi's Munchies bakery, I think it is. Is it just a bakery, but it's gluten-free? And she did a giveaway recently, and I absolutely loved it. I followed all the little updates on Instagram. I know she's there. I can throw her Instagram into the comments because I didn't think to do it in the intro. But she did an Oreo tasting for, was it Nestle? And a new gluten-free version of their Oreo. So that was a lot of fun to watch too. So I did already open, I introduced Michelle, I talked about her, I talked about Michi's Munchies, I talked about finding her on Instagram to watch some of the updates for Michi's Munchies, like she does giveaways, and she did a recent comparison Oreo video. I loved that video. I think I even commented on it. So I at least had to share that because I just loved it. So she has all sorts of things going on. You can check out those details in the description as well. But today we're going to be talking about a couple of what I think are really deep, reflective topics. And so, Michelle, I know that actually she brought these to my attention. So I didn't know if you wanted to open and share a little bit about the waiting period and gestation and what inspired you to talk about that today.
Yeah, gestation. I think that we all understand the gestation period from beginning to end, but the part that I really want to focus on is the waiting period. And I call the waiting period the very last part of the gestational process. And it's the most unique and I think significant because two examples just to get everybody on the same page about what the waiting period would look like. So let's say that you're pregnant and you go through the 10 months and your due date is January 1st. And you hit January 1st and the baby's not here yet. So at any moment and any time you could go into labor and you are waiting. You're waiting and your body is doing exactly what it needs to do to either reserve its energy to propel into the momentum that's going to come, or it's getting whatever nutrient resources and context to really pull through the transformation that's going to occur. And I just love this period of the waiting period because in these moments when you are ready, yet you're waiting, there's this presence and awareness and surrender and letting go, and just it's the deepest essence of really being within yourself as momentum is shifting. So it's just such a really beautiful place. Another example would be say you're a racer and you're at the running racer and you're at the front of the line, you're ready, you've got your hands down, you're in position, and you're waiting for the gun to go off. And in that moment, the amount and level that you can release, surrender, let go, be completely present is going to be the kind of like pull back on the arrow of the burst that you're going to get when the gun goes off. If you're tense, it's not going to give you that burst. You're going to get half of the momentum that you could have gotten if you just really leaned into that waiting period. It's just so significant and so kind of small in perspective to like the whole gestational process or the whole growth period that you've just gone through.
Yes, and it requires so much awareness and intuition to really contact that, I feel like, and to even
Mm-hmm.
know that it's there and to recognize that impetus to let go. Because I know in my pregnancy, as an example, because it's so relatable for people, uh, I don't know if I ever got the chance in that particular context to experience what you share here because I was so anxious. And I like that you spoke to that, where you kind of hit this, if you're unable to surrender that surface level, maybe anxiety or whatever it is, anticipation, eagerness, it's difficult to contact that beautiful presence that waits for you underneath that. And I know for me, right, we all have this like a physical reality that might be showing us something that's making us anxious when in truth there's so much more available underneath that. In my case, I was like gigantic, swollen. I couldn't move. I couldn't put on my pants. I couldn't get out of the shower without help. I was so swollen. And so it's like we have all these reasons to not sort of let go and release into that space. We have every reason and more not to. But I feel like that's where there is so much, not only potential, but presence, beauty available in that space, which I've been able to contact in other areas, but not pregnancy. And I wanted to speak to that because I feel like people often get lost because of those more physical reasons, or like even when it comes to waiting for some other kind of birth or creation to come through. Is it a project? Is it an art form? Is it a creative expression? And they're thinking, this has to come out now. Maybe there's a real deadline. Maybe they're trying to make a paycheck. Maybe something in their external world is telling them this has to happen now. And yet it's not going to go any faster. In fact, like you're saying, it's more of a likelihood that you're going to push it away and resist it, as opposed to when you release, that momentum will carry you all the way through to fruition.
Yeah, two things to touch on that is when we do get lost on those surface emotions, how much of our empowerment we let go of. Because when we do super surrender or we do fully let go, there is an empowerment quality there because of the connection we create to feel, receive, and do unto the knowing that is supernatural, that is very clear and very personal and indicative of what is procuring for you as a human, as a individual, as a soul, as a spirit, all the things. It's a very coalescing space when we can just really feel one with that period.
Yes, and I even like how you said coalescing, because that's how I've always seen it too. I mean, even for that full gestation period, but especially that final, what would we call that? Like the final, there has to be, you're so good with words. I'm sure there's a really great analogy or metaphor we come up with for that final piece. But I know
You
in
mean the waiting
general,
period or something else?
the waiting period. Yeah, I feel
There
like
is something I've lost touch with it because somebody brought it to my attention, years ago when I was preparing for the doula, because I'm a trained doula, and so there is a word for it, but I've never been able to get back in contact with it, so I just call it the waiting period.
yes, but there is a word. It's like the fringe of our awareness, the tip of our tongue. It'll come, maybe, maybe not.
Right.
But in general, it's like there's so much energy that's coalescing even into form, and people don't. Maybe they don't recognize that. Like you're saying, there is something supernatural and divine intelligence, life's intelligence, whatever you would ever call it. It's putting all of that together, and it needs that space to bring forth that energy so that it can be brought into form, whether it be a baby or otherwise. And I talk about the pregnancy piece because it's so relatable.
Hmm.
It's difficult for people to relate to other examples because most people don't allow this waiting period. They
Right.
force their way through, so they're not familiar with it.
Yeah, what's really beautiful about the pregnancy piece is that, like you talked about, the physical pieces that show up. You said you were swollen. And typically that would be, obviously there's reasons for that. You need enough liquids because you're going to have a lot of endurance, and then you also need to feed your baby for so many days after that. It's all about survival in that context, but in a natural form. And what's interesting about that is that when we are that way, what we need to do is we need to rest. We need to lay down. We're not meant to be as mobile, because we are meant to conserve energy for the endeavor of birthing. And I just feel it's so interesting because the information that we get is to walk, to walk, to walk, to walk. And I'm not against walking, but in my first delivery, I walked too much, and it really delayed the process of my delivery because it told my body, oh, she must be still, if you look at the primal aspect of it, she must still be looking for a safe space to have labor. So my body says, we're going to do what we can, but we're not really going to propel the momentum or propel into the process because she's still searching for her place to lay down. But if I had laid down in the process and not been advised to walk, which, my other two labors are totally different, much more intuitive. And my first delivery is why I went to go get trained to be a doula. So anyway, so lying down, finally when I actually lied down, I think I had a 72-hour labor, so it was not a good experience, my first one. I mean, good in all respects because it led me to the awareness that I have now, but it was just a really difficult labor. But yeah, so those instinctual sensations of feeling swollen, of feeling heavy, of not being able to put your pants on, all those things are telling you something. They're telling you, yes, time to rest, time to lie down, time to reserve, time to get ready, time to, just sit. And I love when you actually follow those inklings, the awareness that erupts of intuitive information that just keeps flowing through into you. I mean, that is like the gift of God, in my opinion. That is the feeling that we're all wanting to experience, that intuitive grace that's guiding us.
Gosh, it's so beautiful. Even just you just sharing it now, I'm just like, I don't know if everyone else is feeling that too. I'm sure you are, those who are watching. This was reminding me of something. Oh yeah, you were talking about like those are the signs to rest. And again, most people, they don't even know the signs. They don't have that awareness to even recognize the signs. And if they do, they still don't follow the signs. And I share that because I want people to see that, what we're talking about isn't like some foreign thing. Like this is an availability for everybody. And yet most people don't see it, myself included, for that, my first and only pregnancy so far. I missed all of that because when that stuff started happening, what started happening for me was I became more anxious. I want this over. And had I just rested in that, like we do when we dream and our brain starts rewiring and it starts integrating and doing all the things that it needs to do when we're ill and our body is resting and it's doing everything it needs to do. It's like whatever context we're looking at, when we create that space to rest, life's intelligence, our body's intelligence, the great wisdom, whatever it is going to do what it needs to do. It's only when we try to grasp or micromanage or control it, that I think we even thwart things that could be happening or supporting us in a better or bigger way that we're not even aware of. But also, I feel like we lose so much opportunity for even joy or for just those kind of emotional experiences we seek, fulfillment, satisfaction. Had I followed the awareness of my own pregnancy, I could have enjoyed that last week. It wouldn't have been so painful. So we really skip out on so much joy, even presence, aliveness, that connection that you were speaking to, the supernatural, when we try to force our way through the very necessary waiting period.
Oh my gosh. Well, in the waiting period, even though we're calling it that, um, we could almost call it the most interconnected section of your growth process. We could call it many different things, but it's, that, and I just love this period because I think that in that moment is when we catalyze an awareness to how deep we actually go. And that's what's the profundity of it all, I suppose. And then, yeah, to your point about when we don't follow those things, activating awareness about like, oh, I received this intuitive thing and yet I'm not doing it, or I'm ignoring it, or I'm absolving it, or I'm doing whatever, and those are the little nooks and crannies that we actually do want to explore, in my opinion, to say, what is motivating us? What is guiding me? What are the reasons why I'm making choices and decisions that upon when I reflect, I've recognized they were out of alignment and didn't serve me? And, in my experience, there is reason and truth there, and ultimately we can change that to serve us or benefit us in a different way. It just takes a little bit of attention, a little bit of intuition, and intuition means your personal response to aligned awareness. And, having somebody who can help you to see it, but then also activate it and give you the either support or validation that their truth is real and exists and it's for them and it's not for anybody else and it's completely individual. That is the power, the empowerment method that helps people to sustain momentum, progression, transformation, all these things that are out there in terms of design and offering that people are really wanting to access. It's just it's a little bit difficult, I believe, in the marketplace to find that if the individual isn't aware on a lot of levels how individual and how powerful and how purposeful and how antiquated we are as a single body being person.
Mm-hmm. Gosh, there's so much there. I'm like, which direction do we want to go? I don't know. Gosh, there's so much there. So I guess one of the first things that I was thinking of too when you were sharing was, again, making it really practical for people, regardless of what it is that you're trying to build, create, experience, what you're birthing, a part of yourself, a new expression, whatever that is. It's like, um, again, people get caught up. Like, so there's two things I'm thinking of based on what you shared, where we have those inner pieces where we're getting anxious or whatever, which are worth exploring. And then I'm also thinking of those very real practical constraints that I've even had clients tell me or people talk about or whatever. They're like, well, yeah, Errity, it would be really great to experience and surrender to that waiting period. And yet, blank, 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 blank. They give me all the reasons as to why it's not possible for them. And what I would want to share based on that is that might very well be a reality, but I think once you become aware of those pieces, you always have the ability to change that. It may not happen overnight.
Mm-hmm.
Again, there's still greater waiting period to make some changes and transformations in your life. But if you're finding you're in a situation where you're always on a deadline, where there's something that has to happen right now and it's all on you and there's no support elsewhere to make that happen, if you're finding you're always living in survival mode, there are opportunities. And I'm not saying that there's not a lot of context and variables to this, like privilege and so on and so forth. However, we do have the opportunity to make those necessary changes so that we are able to create space for this more expanded awareness or this deeper connection, being able to listen to our intuition, which, is difficult when you live within a system or a personal reality that can't honor that right now. Well,
Right.
then that's the impetus to change that and create a life and a reality that can honor how you feel or where you're at or what you're experiencing inside. Because I always want to make it really practical for people too. Is, well, how do you apply this? Like, people might know it, but how does it actually come to life in everyday life? So I wanted to make sure I shared that. Although there's so much more that you shared, even like on the intuition piece and exploring, those areas as to why am I listening to this as opposed to my intuition. And usually that why is because they're pointing at some practical reality in their external world that is holding them back in some way or forcing a particular choice or outcome or whatever.
Yeah, and that's essentially giving your power to someone else instead of recognizing your own. But I did want to mention, since you talked about the people's reasons and maybe the defeatist or just like very challenged position of ever completing or accessing or doing the things that they deeply desire but don't really know how to get there. And you actually said it, and the very, very first thing that will get anyone closer to any of those aspects is creating space. You might have a million things to do, but even if you begin with 1 minute of creating space for yourself, there's a lot of depth to be had in 1 minute, if you can really just give yourself 1 minute. So there's really, I don't want to say that there's no limit to, I guess limit isn't the right word, but there's no in my opinion. Not that there's no valid reason, but there's no real, in my opinion, I guess this is going to be a brash statement, but there's really no excuse, because 1 minute can take you so far. And I don't know when I would explore with people who have a frame of mind of like either I can't or it's not for me or all the reasons, we can go into every single one of those reasons, and of course there's awareness to be had, and there's information, lessons learned, all the things that can be explored there. But honestly, if you wanted to even not look at that, and you were just like, I'm going to give myself time, the greatest commodity of all time, 1 minute to sit with myself, 1 minute, and you will begin to see the transformation if you do that daily. Your awareness is in tune with what you give it. And so 1 minute is a lot to your awareness, and it will develop and grow. There's elements to what you can incorporate in that 1 minute, and they vary for all people. In the end, that is what I feel is great, and is having someone on the journey with you. And what's so fascinating about that is that holding space for people is actually a validation of a sort for them to create space for themselves, right? But I'm going to tell you right now, you could create space for yourself without someone holding space for you. And just explore, like be open to whatever that landscape looks like. And if you do need help, there are so many people out here ready to and wanting to help people in this process of getting acquainted with your, many terms on this, centered self, higher self, soul self, spiritual self, all the aspects and facets of who we really truly are. And again, that is going to vary in terminology from every single person. So yeah, I love language arts as well. So and connecting with people on like all the different dimensional levels, or all the different contextual experiential levels, it's like just my passion.
And that's what I absolutely love about you. And you are Scorpio, right? That's what I
I
had said in the
am.
opening. Okay, and
Um,
just like your depth and your ability to, and your expansion, just everything that you offer, it's just like really, really deep. And I know maybe not everyone is privy to those deeper layers, but that's what I love about you, among other things. But I absolutely love that. And there was something that I wanted to share based on what you were sharing as well. Oh, people might say, how do I create space? I don't even have 1 minute, some people say. And it's like all you ever have to do is, if you do nothing else, and I had to learn this the hard way over the past 10 years based on how I behaved in my early 20s, and it was just slowing down. Sometimes it's just that. You don't have to rush through dishes. Like I have my sister, she always wants to get everything done in a day, and, she has multiple kids, kind of wearing the hat and wearing the mini hat that most moms do. And she always talks about sort of having to frenziedly go, do this and do that. And it's like all we ever have to do is slow down the dishes. Maybe you usually frantically do it and rush through the process for 3 to 5 minutes. And not only are you anxious and then encouraging more of that physiology and more of that rapid heart rate and so on and so forth, but you're not enjoying it, you're not present, and then you're more likely to snap at somebody or whatever. It's like, why not open that space and allow yourself 20 minutes to do the dishes? People don't realize that, and then of course they might tell themselves they can't get things done, but it's like there's always going to be an excuse, and I like that you even said that, because these are all really excuses, and excuses are valid, and yet anytime you have an excuse, you can recognize there's a potential for breakthrough. Any excuse has the potential for breakthrough. And I think one of those breakthroughs, at least in the context of this conversation, is simply slowing down. That's all you ever have to do is to slow down. Then you have your minute or 15 while you do dishes. You can connect with yourself. And I do often. And I look outside and I see the horses and all the things while I'm doing dishes. Most people hate that. But I love that space. It's like, it's really that self-responsibility of how are we going to create our lives? What is the experience we want to create for ourselves? I know you touched on this a little bit yesterday, even with emotions when we were talking about that, but I can either be anxious and frenzied and frantic and upset that I'm doing dishes, resentful, bitter, hateful, angry, thinking about my task list. Well, the dishes have to get done either way. So I can spend my time doing dishes, doing that, or I can spend it creating that space again, like you were referring to, that 1 minute.
yeah, kind of tying these things together, having the dishes done. If you're in that waiting period, maybe the dishes are not supposed to be done, and maybe the people in your household are going to learn to fend for themselves a little bit and take a learning moment for themselves. um, the thing about excuses, we're conditioned to assume excuses are negatively based. Well, what if my excuse is I'm worth it? I'm going to do this because I'm worth it. I'm going to give myself 1 minute because I love myself. And that's an excuse on the positive end, and we're not conditioned to do that. So we can just reframe and retrain.
Yeah, love that because I hadn't even considered that angle before. I'm going to check in on the comments here.
Yeah.
Okay, so someone, Lynn, you said nice analogy, and so now it's out of context, but I'm assuming maybe talking about pregnancy earlier or one of those analogies. And then Deborah says, "Hey, ladies, hello." That's all we have so far. And then someone was talking about sound earlier, but I think we're good in that regard now. There's something else I thought we could talk about in terms of the gestation period and see what you have to share, and then maybe we'll be able to have some space. Maybe I know you have a little bit going on as well on emotions, but I also know I've seen the flip side of the waiting period where I think so much of this requires such radical honesty with ourselves, which again requires us to be able to create space for ourselves. Because some people live in the waiting period, but they call it that. It's not really that. That's why you really have to be in tune.
Right.
Um, to recognize what is waiting period and what isn't. I know people that I can think of in my life right now who are always waiting and saying, "Oh, things are coming together," or "Oh, if they're more Christian based or whatever, God's working on a plan for me." Or maybe it's an artist, because I know an artist and I'm thinking of them, and they're like, "Oh, I just don't have the inspiration yet. It's gonna come." So it's like there's a real waiting period of like, not to even say that it's not real when we impose it, but there's like the waiting period that life creates that is natural, that is organic to our life and to our process. And then there's the waiting periods our mind tells us are waiting periods. And I see people wait on something and they call it, any one of those other things their whole lives. And they miss out on the opportunity to create, to show up, to birth something, whatever it is, whether it's a piece of art or a business or whatever. Those are just the people I'm thinking of in my head. So I wanted to hear too what you might have to share on that and how you might be able to tell the difference.
Ooh, yeah, those were good ones. So, as you were speaking about it, intuitively, when you do acknowledge the waiting period, just like any other emotion, like we talked about yesterday, any other emotion you can hang on to. And I mean, the waiting period can be very comfortable. Can you imagine being pregnant, pretty swollen, finding a comfortable spot in bed and just not wanting to wake up, not get up? I mean, just being like, oh, this is just great. The difference between like a natural progression and like delivery and birth, where you actually, the baby is going to come out, so like the body takes over. So those are like, something that's propelled physically is going to be different than something that's propelled consciously. And so when you have intuitive, you're in an intuitive connection in a conscious reality, in a conscious space where the difference or the birth or the momentum and progression comes from awareness, and then what the moving through the waiting period is the action that you take. Okay, so like, you tap into the waiting period and you recognize you're in a waiting period, and then you do what you need to do, intuitively responsive. And what I have found is that there's always something that's subtly whispering, like, this is what's next, this is what's next. And you're really just teetering between doing that action or not doing it. And it doesn't go away. And it's almost like annoying, and I mean, I would almost compare this to like Braxton Hicks, like the subtle, like, I'm coming for you, is getting there, and it's your choice though. And then that's the difference between consciousness and awareness and like the physical realities, is that the will of your being is the activator of the propellant and momentum of your conscious evolution, of your personal evolution and transformation. But it's then doing the thing that's showing up, whatever that is. And it may look like, it could look like a billion things, but let's say it's for a songwriter. It's like, just write because writing's going to release, the layers over the next song lyrics. Or, for someone like me, I do a lot of writing, so I tend to put things in a writing context, but it would be like, just do the thing so you can experience it, and then from there you make your next conscious choice, and then it becomes like this process. It just continues to develop. So I'm actually, we were talking about this because I'm in a little bit of, or I literally made the action last night, but I was in a waiting period for probably, it's so fascinating, probably like 6 weeks. But like the last 3 weeks, it got really deep where, well, it progressively got deeper until I made a choice last night. Now I had committed to propelling back up, and I've recognized, oh, the last week and a half has been just very subtle movement, very still, very uncommitted to anything. That's what it feels like. It just feels like nothing. And a lot of people are not comfortable in nothing. It's not safe, because if you are in nothing, then you might mean nothing. You aren't doing, achieving, moving, progressing, productivity wise, blah, blah, blah. All these things would typically tell us our worthiness and our value and all of that. And, but when you let that all go and you can just sit there, because honestly, that breadth of nothingness, it really gives you the silent whispers of like what's teaching or telling you something way in the back corners. Nothing else is coming in, and I love to hear those, because it can be not serving you and you're like, oh, I really need to give that attention because it's not going to serve me when I propel up. And then it could be like, oh, this is a constant thing, I really want to activate that when I'm ready to move. And so you really get just like a really blank slate into your own, I would say, design, into your own lower root makings, if that makes sense. And you choose, this is going, this is staying, this is going, this is staying. And then you have a better basis and foundation for your forward momentum, for your movement.
Gosh, it's so beautiful. And as you were talking about that little voice, those little voices, that's when the birds started singing. So I just thought I would share that.
Mine too.
That's exactly. It was right when you said it. You'll have to go rewind later, right when you said it, that started happening. So,
Okay.
but I love that you brought some awareness for people. How do I know if I'm truly in a waiting period or if I'm not, kind of thing? And are you receiving inspiration to move and you're not? That would tell you that maybe you're perpetuating them, maybe you're stagnating in some way, because stagnation isn't good for the soul either, right? The soul wants to
Right.
expand, contract, and expand. Um, and then I like how you said it, it's even annoying because I always say too, like God, well, first we'll say God, whatever you want to call it,
Right.
knock at the door, then he yells at the door, and then he barges the door down. So it's like you'll never get away from it. That voice will continue to come up. And if you find that it is and you're ignoring it, well, that would be your sign that perhaps you've extended the waiting period beyond expiration dates or something like that. I also like how you talked about sort of that womb space of nothingness, because that's where things are born. That's where things die. Things are born. Like almost like you said, that propelling, like that's where that energy comes from, and it's from that deep womb space. And like you said, people do get scared of that, don't they? They make it mean something about themselves, their own mortality or something, or like you said, their worth and value in a society that says, get up, do this, achieve that. And they can't allow themselves to really deepen into that space. But I feel like there's so much beauty there. And we've just missed so much as a society. I mean, culturally, not really allowing ourselves to be in that. And that's why I love that you brought this forward so we could share about it, because I really do feel like for most people, mass consciousness, it's lost. It's a lost mystery, a lost beauty, something that really isn't. We don't create space for it. We certainly don't surrender to it.
Oh, my favorite place. I love that you brought up the element of like womb space and even death, because that nothingness, it really is that, right? So if we were going to use different language, we could relate all of this to the woman's cycle, or a birth in progress. So like that nothingness, that deep space where everything is kind of dark, or nothing's really being activated. It's just being kind of accessed on deeper and deeper and deeper levels, and then it's like there's the ending, and it feels like there's an immortal death there. Like, okay, there's nothing. And it's so perfect, because that from there is like the spark of, let's maybe just use the word genius, but I would almost say life. It's the spark of life. And then when you kind of get to that really, dark place, I've had really, dark, dark places layered in a lot of stuff. And that is really freaking difficult. And I needed people to help me to get out of there. But because I've done it so many times and I've had the support and I've created the awareness, and maybe at times mechanisms, that were appropriate for that time. But now, because I'm really in tune, astute in the process, all these things, that when we get down to that darkness, that dark space, I really can just understand at the bottom that there isn't a death. It feels like you're dying. It can feel like you're dying. And just as a small reflective piece, in these last 6 weeks, in the last 2 weeks, there have been like thoughts in my mind of death. And um, and it's great, because if you cannot internalize those and recognize it for, I had this great spiritual healer, and I assume that everybody knows this, but when he told me at the time, I didn't, and it was really catalyzing for me. He was like, I said, I feel like I'm dying. I literally was like having compulsive death thoughts, and he was like, yes, because there is a part of you that is dying, and we're going to let that happen. And he would just made a safe space for it, right? Without giving me any fear-based illusions around it. And so now when I continue to release and surrender and let go of any ideations of what some of my thoughts might mean for any reason, right? We don't always, anyway. So if you just continue to go down to the deep dark, and you don't necessarily have to put as many definitions or meanings to it, and just allow and just continue. I know it's uncomfortable. I know it's not even sane sometimes. But then you get there, and it's like that nothingness bursts into light, gratitude, exactly what you need. And you just kind of continue to go and flow and space with it. And I think that like right after that part, that is the birth. That is the birthingness that happens, and it is life-giving, and it is a life forming and rejuvenating, and that is like ultimately the transformative process that begins into the new shape of who you are. And shapes can last for however long. Some people say it's on a 7-year cycle. I mean, if it's just a general small transition or change, then perhaps it's like, a 1-month cycle. I mean, I do moon cycles. I do birthing consciousness. I do doula work. It's like everybody's in a different transformational experience and process and stage. So it's just a really interesting dynamic to be like, in all these spaces.
Yes. And there's so much beauty about being a woman and being able to experience this intrinsically. And I know you spoke to that, and even with our monthly cycles, where it's like everything slows down. And in indigenous cultures and tribes, women had the red tent, and they went and they were in a bed for 7, 10 days, or whatever their length of their cycle was. And they were just there, allowing whatever needs to happen to happen. And they created that space to allow for that, for whatever deaths and rebirths or whatever were to come through for that month. That's a 1 month cycle, a
Yeah.
reinvention every single month that's available to women. And I imagine in some way too for men. I don't know what that would be the equivalent necessarily in a physical form, but I'm sure it's available in some regard. But for us, we get to actively be reminded of this every single month, of this opportunity for that. And when you were sharing too that fear that comes up of death when you are more or less on the edge of it or thinking that you are, I mean, and it is a version of death. It certainly is. And you have that fear, and that's where you don't want to let go. But obviously, that's the opportunity to let go, to like surrender. And that's what people talk about when they're saying like those experiences. What do they call them? Peak experiences. It's when you are willing to let go and allow yourself to be enlightened, or whatever experience is to come of that. But right at that edge, it's like it reminded me of someone like jumping off a cliff and then being like convinced of their death, but the death never comes. So they finally surrender to it, they accept it, and they wake up and they realize, hmm, whoa, I'm still alive. Everything's here. I'm on 2 feet on the ground. And that's just the visual that came to me when you were sharing that, though, but that acceptance of having to more or less let yourself die, but you're letting go of control. And that's where
Yeah.
people think that they're dying, because they're letting go of
Which
control.
is what's so fascinating about letting go of control is that, um, well, one, you don't need to control, because everything is kind of happening innately, intuitively, as like almost as though it's already designed or something. But really, that's just the making of who you are activated in the present, if that makes sense. Um, but it's so also really interesting how we're talking about transformation, and a lot of these, in terms of language, saying we're just making changes. Like some people can attract to the word of like, I don't know if I can really do a transformation, but I can make some changes, right? And I always find this really fascinating, like how to iterate things so that they can be received and activated upon. Because, I can go as far as to talk in multidimensional languages and, birthing consciousness and the depth within and the dark and all this. But then sometimes it's like, what resonates is like, okay, well, we're going to look at today and we're going to reflect on our thoughts. There's just a different level in terms of words. And I think it's really powerful to know because um, everybody has access to this dialogue, to this um, process and evolution of the self, and nobody is limited, period.
Mhm. Mm. Mhm. I love that you even said that so specifically. And you and I tend to parallel. We have like maybe even very different journeys, but we tend to sort of be like mulling over or sitting with or chewing on or digesting certain things at certain times. And we had even connected yesterday. And as I was lying in bed last night, and I can't even now think of what the other parts of this thought stream or insight stream was, but it was like love is without limitation. That's what love is. Love is abundance. So many people assume that because our form reality, our form-based reality, practical reality is so limited and there's only just enough and there's this and there's that and everything's in form, that that's how things are supposed to be or that's the way it is. But love is limitless. It just keeps going and going. It's abundant. People think that they have to take in order to, this is a kind of a side conversation, but this is what came through last night. And when you said that, I'm very inspired to talk about it. But it was like people get so quote unquote nervous about like, oh, if I give, am I ever going to get, or whatever those kinds of reservations are about really standing in a space of love and occupying that space and allowing that abundance to come through you and then share it so generously. And but when you are in that space of love, it's automatic, it's natural, it's effortless, it's organic, it just comes and it comes and it's coming, it's limitless when you're in that space. Now we're in the space of, what we might call ego mind, there's a million different words like you said, you're going to feel pretty limited. You might feel like, oh, I don't have enough time or I can't, or am I going to get something back? you know and those are real and valid to the extent that you occupy that space, but as soon as you allow yourself again to even surrender well enough to be in the space that we're talking about, you find that it's all, yeah, it's limitless, and the abundance is already there. So just a side note, but something that came through yesterday, and I just couldn't believe that you just like nailed that, it's without limitation. We are without limitation.
Yeah, just as a small example for what you were saying is like, when you give and you expect a return. So imagine like, me as a being, right? And I give to this certain extent because at this point, like I've depleted and or my resources and or whatever, right? So I need a return from that distance, right? If you have that perception, subconsciously or consciously become aware of it, doesn't really matter. You have made a frame, a container for how for how far that abundance can go, right? But if you just open that up and you just are like, okay, I'm going to just give to give without an expectation, you receive from this angle, from that length, from that distance, and it's just like, if we can get more awareness around that, about how some part of our mind frames, constructs, constrict the, or like contain is a better word, contain the actual movement that could occur, it's just so fascinating to me, and I'm not saying that it's an easy thing because we do have so many layers of survival mentality, conditioned in a way that disserves opportunity and potential. So I get it. Like I really do get it. And it's a slow, it can, I don't want to diminish that it can happen in an instant, but I would almost say that more than likely it's a developmental process. It's something that gets activated through your being, your body, your awareness, and it can be sped up. It can be. But that also has to do with your willingness and your ability to act, to do the things. And
Wow,
that
it's so
requires
beautiful.
overcoming fear. Huh? What's that?
Oh, I'm just saying that was just so beautiful.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, yeah.
Keep going.
I mean, I love how you talked about when you come up with all these conditions, really, or reservations or whatever, about how much you can give. You're essentially putting conditions on how much you can receive. And
Right.
so then you're living in this very tight, constricted, limited reality, believing that the abundance isn't there, the love isn't there for me, people aren't going to give to me. But at the end of the day, it was actually because you had set those limits, because you had said, I can only give this much, which also means it's going to limit what you can receive. And I see that a lot. And the other thing I see a lot is people tend to focus on like one area. My husband doesn't give to me, or life doesn't, God doesn't give to me, whoever, my mom never gave to me. Like they focus on one person and want so much from that person. But I like how you mentioned when you do find it in you after a gradual process of growth or evolution or surrender, whatever, you find that once you open that container or that space within yourself or to receive, and you recognize all of this, you will find that maybe you don't get it from your mom, maybe you never do, but you'll get it from this angle, and this angle, and this angle. It's like trusting that the abundance, it's coming. It may not come in the form that you're asking for, like obsessing over and focusing on, but the abundance is there and more than likely coming from many different areas. You may never see that $500 you loaned Sally Joe in 2003. Okay, you might not, but guess what? There's a bunch of different abundance coming in all of these other angles and areas.
When it comes to emotional context, and I don't know if we're going to make a good segue here, but there's something that because you said, getting from your mom or getting from this person or that person, right? When it comes to emotional context, I would say that I would like to introduce to mainstream that there's words that I want to put together, but the other was never intended to fill that for you, whatever that is. They were just never supposed to. We have been informed and continually reminded, as different words of what is it? God, the other word went away. So anyway, conditioned is the right word. But we've been we've been taught and then continually reminded that that's the way it is. Through, it's just it's a perpetuation of dependence, which I'm not. There's a difference, and there's a difference between interconnection and dependence. And anyway, there's all these frames that come through that people put on and assume is their identity. However, what I was going to say is that what I would like to see our culture, our species, our humanity to transform into, is elements of, not elements, is the connection with self-sourcing. And I don't know that this is necessarily revolutionary, but I would say that the awareness around it can be revolutionary for this time. So self-sourcing would essentially leave you as the operator of your life's design and all of anything that anyone is seeking. And you can do this through the axis of yourself, as the axis, but you, in that, everything that you are constructed of from the beginning of your origin until now, if we could just recognize, I know this seems probably really big, just how valuable we are, just how incredible we are, just how much we have in our cells, DNA, like in our creation of this right here. Like if we could just really see that and hold it and do with it what we could with highly resonant resourcefulness. God, a lot of what I perceive as little problems today, a lot of these problems, they just really wouldn't exist. And then you can refocus on what is your purpose, your genius. So and this is interesting to the gestational period. People just want to say, oh, I want someone to tell me my purpose, or I want somebody to tell me my genius, or I want someone to activate it for me, or I want this and this. And it's like, it's a development, and it's a access and a process within yourself. Like, and I don't think people want to market that, like, because if they did, then they wouldn't need anybody else. But it's not to say those people won't help you, but I don't think that it has integrity to tell people that I'm going to give you your genius, or I'm going to give you your purpose. No. I'm going to be here in witness to you developing your own purpose witness, purpose genius, whatever activation you're seeking. And I'm going to honor that process with you, because without it, without really truly being seen, sometimes we can't exactly fortify it or see it for ourselves. And that's because of a lot of the wounding, the conditioning, the pain, the suffering, the things that we haven't really gone through. And, as in the position and role that you're in, there is something to say about iterating some of our pain and our strife and our struggles, whether that's writing or telling somebody. I found it mostly, like, I do a lot of writing just like you, and it has helped me. But for me, in my understanding, the next step is to really own it as a part of you, and a lot of that pain and frustration gets released. And these are some of the layers that I'm saying, that, like, once you get past and move through these in different ways, you can really access your true purpose, genius, presence, awareness, truth, source, just this activated being that really, to some extent, doesn't really have a lot of terminology or verbatim for right now.
Mm-hmm.
I know
Absolutely.
that
I
was a lot.
totally agree. But I wanted to share on what you said for people who are watching who feel like, but I'm at that place where I don't know my purpose and I want that help, but I want someone to tell me and I want someone to activate it. Here's the thing, that is a part of your path and process. That very well might be a part of your process. But the sort of end game ultimately would be for people to self-source. That is the end game for humanity. Whether we're there not there yet or not, or realize that or not, or even want to believe it or recognize it or not. A lot of people don't. They don't want to take that responsibility into their hands. And if they're not there yet, that's okay too. But I want you to have that reassurance that you might not be there yet, and that's okay. And you can recognize that you will be eventually. You can also own that right the fuck now. So it's really in your hands, whichever way you look at it. I didn't know if there was anything else that you wanted to share, Michelle. I know you have to
One thing.
depart. Yeah, I wanted you to be able to have the final share here to conclude.
Not just that, but on what you just said, huge spoiler alert. Your genius, your purpose, your activated soul level, it's all in progress. So once you get there, I mean, it's cool, right? But it's like, that's still, there's something that you interconnect continually with time. It's like an interweaving process. It's not like you find it, it, and you're saved. I mean, I think that that's part of the, like, cultural, or I don't know, there's some systemic system that's saying, like, and I think it has to do with marketing, like, I'll tell you your genius. It's like, this is not a matter of fact. This is an essence. This is a grace of your awareness and your personal evolution. So find your people. So once you access yourself, it's an evolution in progress. Your personal access begins really through and to yourself, and it is a consistent it's just a consistent connection. And yeah, so I guess it's like I was going to say, I think it's the marketing, the online space, which says this point, there's this point, and like I was about to say, it has to do with the savior mentality, almost, the, like, oh, once I'll give you this and you'll have it what you need, or and it's all intertied and interwoven with a lot of constructs and foundations that don't serve us to date. And yeah, that's a little bit of a hard pill to swallow, right? That we could be living in a way that doesn't constitute our true nature, essence, and quality to date. We are so much more than we believe we are presently. And it's really time to activate that, really time to get an awareness and connection with that, because my personal belief, everybody is so freaking cool, purposeful, valuable. They have so much to offer. And I do believe that the awakening that people are talking about is them coming into that awareness for themselves. And then like the practice and the development is going to be learning how to sustain and to actually be that in the world. And I think, as an overarching kind of view, that's kind of what's happening right now.
Mm-hmm. Yes, beautifully articulated as always. And there's actually so much more we could talk about. But I'd love to get
Yes,
into like the journey. Evolution is the point. Like that's the whole thing. You're not gonna know it right now. You may not ever pinpoint it, bullseye it. That's I don't know if that's even necessary because, like you said, ultimately we live it out and it's available in any moment. But all of that to say, I think we should do a part two where we talk about more of this, maybe even the emotions, as well as we could even talk about online marketing. That would be a lot of fun.
that would be yes.
Yeah, that would be a lot of fun and maybe even a little controversial. Get people talking. So we could do that another time. Thank you so much, Michelle, for joining us today. I so appreciate it. I absolutely love having conversations with you in general, and then to be able to share with other people. What an honor and a good time.
I know, me too. Thank you so much for having me. There's a lot more to share. I'm just coming through with some of my offerings. So, I mean, we're in this group and I'm sure we'll stay connected. And the emotional piece is going to be awesome because we didn't get to touch on it.
Yes. So everyone, we'll be back around again to be continued. I will make sure that I put her, on there. The same thing. You'll be able to find her, Michelle Drury, and you can friend her as well. Find her links. Mickey's Munchies is also on Instagram. And then, like I said, we'll be back for round two at some point, probably in the next month-ish, up to
Yeah,
Christmas.
perfect. Whenever's
All right.
ready. I'm good.
Cool. All right. Bye, everybody. Thanks, Michelle.
Bye, of course.